With rising tensions in the Korean peninsula, the U.S. and South Korea carrying out the largest air drills, only to be followed by North Korean retaliation with missiles fired across the border with South Korea. We explore what this escalation could mean for the region's geopolitics. Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks, covering the latest global news and analysis from a Taiwan perspective. I'm Betty Chen.
I'm Rath Wang. Joining us in the studio today is Charles Wu, Associate Professor of the Department of Diplomacy at National Zhengzhi University. Charles is an expert in the region's geopolitics and U.S.-Taiwan relations, and Albert Chiu, Professor of Political Science at Donghai University. Albert is also an expert in international affairs. We are glad to have you back. I spoke earlier to Patrick Cronin, Asia-Pacific Security Chair at the Hudson Institute based in Washington, D.C., who is also an expert in U.S. Indo-Pacific defense and East Asian and Korean geopolitics. Cronin was also a former U.S. government official, working in both defense and foreign policy under several U.S. administrations. He is also a frequent commentator in South Korea's Donghai Ilbo and the Singaporean Strait Times. I also spoke earlier to Bob Sutter, Professor of Practice of International Affairs at George Washington University. Bob is a former U.S. Foreign Service officer and a longtime expert on East Asian geopolitics, also based in Washington, D.C. Before we go into the details of the Korean Peninsula, let's start today's discussion with the current state of the world's geopolitics and what this could mean for Taiwan's arguably most important ally, the United States. My first question goes to you, Charles. The U.S. Department of Defense recently released its 2022 Nuclear Posture Review, which it lists Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran as potential adversaries, nuclear adversaries of the U.S. For our international audience, could you please explain what are the key implications of this, and how will this affect U.S. strategy in the Indo-Pacific and, in terms, Taiwan?
Every year, the U.S. will publish their NPR. 2012, 22 NPR. We can say this time they face a lot of we call like challenges, and also there's a lot of push from the nuclear hawks, because those nuclear hawks and lobbyists want to United States to add more military arsenals. However, from this time we can see that the tone and also the structure of the 2022 NPR is more similar to, I think, Obama's administrations. Okay, they make some adjustments because they're facing more nuclear challenges from China, Iran, and also Russia and North Korea. And we can say, first thing is we can see United States want to promote the terms and also the rhetorics to show their resilience. Okay, because once they have the resilience, they can maintain their second strike capability for nuclear weapons. One of very important characteristics of second strike capabilities. You want to make your nuclear weapons more credible and more capable, and this will create a deterrence to the potential enemies.
If you could talk about second strike, what does that mean?
Usually when you say second strike, because the first time, when you have the nuclear war is going to happen, your enemy will target your nuclear base and all your nuclear facilities. Once you shut them, they will find out and they will destroy that. Mm-hmm. So you need to move and also find out a location for your second strike locations or the base to initiate the nuclear weapons. So this is why we call the second strike capability. It's very important for a country with nukes. The second very important thing for this year, 2022 NPR, is the United States, they targeted 4 countries. Okay, we call the Nuke 4 or Authoritarian 4. Those 4, first is they have different regime types. They are authoritarian regimes, which means they are totally different from the United States. They share totally different values. When they have different regime types and also have nukes, we put into what we call the conflict models, will be a chaos. So this is why the United States and Washington, they are very, very careful about if those 4 countries, if they make some alliance in the future, and they also have nuclear capabilities, whether they will bring the whole war into, we call the third war, nuclear war. This is one thing we probably can discuss later on. The Washington, they are really, try to put this one into their NPR.
Do you feel it's a return to, say, George W. Bush era, where he named the axis of evil, including Iran and all these countries? You don't see it that far.
I don't think the Biden administration will use a very similar term. But I mean, they mentioned these 4 countries about they have the nuclear capabilities, and also they create some potential threats to the world order. And we know there's a war right now between Ukraine and Russia, right? And people are talking about the potential of a nuclear war in the future. So I think this is a very critical moment this time, and also it's the right time for the Washington to publish the 2022 NPR.
Thank you, Charles, for your response. And now I would like to raise the question to Albert. We know that in China's 20th National Congress of the CCP, Xi Jinping reiterated that China will never give up the use of force against Taiwan. But Taiwan is considered also a very important strategic asset in the first island chain to the United States. And also, Taiwan is one of the world's busiest waterways. So we do have our strategic importance. How likely is an invasion from China to Taiwan, and what will the U.S. respond to this kind of invasion, and what will the other allies do to help Taiwan?
We have seen the recent dynamic in the Pacific Indian Ocean, and especially across the Taiwan Strait, that this whole region in the past used to be peaceful and in a relative stability. But now the situation changed a little bit, especially after the 20th Congress in China. We see that Xi Jinping is taking his third term, probably forever until his death, right? So many people speculate that what might be the next step for him, okay? And what Charlie just mentioned about the situation in the Korean Peninsula. So the whole situation from the from the peninsula to cross-strait between Taiwan and China has been very tense. Okay, so what might be our preparation as Taiwanese? I think number one is that our generation, people like our age, we have to reframe our thinking about the future of Taiwan. That maybe in our father or mother's generation, we were not so worried about warfare or any kind of regional conflict between Taiwan and China. But we know that some people in Taiwan really look for a more pacified or kind of dovish, if you will, type of approach towards China. But the thing about that is, though, whether or not Xi Jinping is willing to accept our friendliness. Maybe they do, but they do based on an assumption that Taiwan is part of China and based on assumption that we believe one country, two systems, which obviously is not a mainstream idea in Taiwan. So if that route is not plausible, we cannot go with that, we might have to take the second option, which is that we get prepared. We get prepared not only militarily, but also mentally. We have to tell ourselves and also our children that Taiwan is a valuable democracy. It's assets. It's not only to America, but also to ourselves. So we have to, show the determination to the international society as much as the Ukrainian government and also the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, did in the past. And we have seen that it worked. It worked for a while and it's still working, right? So I think the determination and also the mentality in the Taiwanese, among the Taiwanese society, people, is very important for us to do, so far.
Some also argue that because of that determination, we've seen a lot of support, as you mentioned, with Ukraine, and also, but with Taiwan, there is a direct interest in the country from the U.S. in terms of semiconductors, or the first island chain. Right. Do you feel that Taiwan needs to move into the level of Ukraine in terms of self-defense and all that, or do you feel that the U.S., with all its distractions, say North Korea, and you have Ukraine, and then you have China and all that, do you feel that it will come to help Taiwan, and can Taiwan leverage on that, or do you feel that we need to prepare ourselves to the extent of Ukraine?
I think the first part of my conversation was about our own responsibility. And the second part, as you address regarding the semiconductor industry in Taiwan, still, for example, primarily TSMC is still the leading industry in that aspect, right? But I also knew that there is some type of criticism from the domestic America by saying that TSMC, the way it works, violates the domestic law of the U.S. So we have to solve that kind of conflict. Just to make the statement more clear is that the TSMC, maybe they refuse a receipt to share more information with the United States government, whereas the Biden administration did not like that. And but also that it's against the domestic law. So they might punish TSMC by their domestic law, like civil law or even the criminal law. Okay, so that's something that we have to solve. From the business perspective, TSMC is still leading. But companies in the second position, third position, like from Korea, from Japan, they want to catch up with TSMC. So TSMC itself is under pressure of improving. I remember in the previous episodes, I mentioned that it has to improve its capability not only in terms of its technology advancement, but also the wage structure and also the working environment and so on. So that they can conform to the standards of the Western societies. So that's still a long way to go.
I think you mentioned a great point in terms of competitiveness, but I think the big question is, will the U.S. come to Taiwan's defense, and should we rely on that? Do you feel that Taiwan needs to beef up in order to not just have support for that, or I'll let Charles, you answer that.
I think the United States, Washington strategy right now is they want to a more clear policy about their commitments. This is why Biden mentioned 4 times about whether they will intervene the potential conflicts in Taiwan Strait. However, this is one big question is the United States wants Taiwanese also, you equip yourself. You better have enough capability to defend by yourself.
And that's also a clear message from Washington.
Yes, especially you have a symmetric capability. They want you build up as a porcupine. They use the term porcupine. Okay. However, there's another way to think is whether Taiwanese they believe or they trust the United States will come for help. I have one data show just done by the TDS electoral data survey data in Taiwan. In 2022, they showed that almost 80% of Taiwanese they still doubt if there's a conflict happened. United States will come to help. Yes, okay. So this is why there's a debate. Okay, the debate. Even United States want to show their commitments, and they want to change from strategic ambiguity to clarity. Taiwanese people still like they don't want really this kind of chaotic cross-strait relations.
Uncertainty is still out there.
Yes, so this is one very still a big problem for us. And if they don't trust, how can they equip themselves? So this is one thing we need to tell ourselves, education our next generation. If there's a potential conflict in front of us, how can we handle this? How can we deal with it? How can we equip ourselves?
So with more global conflicts, do you feel that confidence actually goes down as you see the U.S. trying to put fires out in Korea, you see it, in Ukraine and all that, or?
But there's also a dilemma because if the United States, they kind of decrease their commitment, especially security commitment to the Asia allies. For example, they decrease commitment to Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, Australia. They are waiting there and they see, we decrease their commitments, and they'll lose the confidence. So I think this kind of, very interesting situation for the United States. How can they balance between a strong commitment and also a lukewarm commitment, and also show the deterrence to the potential attacker that. Hey, don't move. Don't try to break the red line. I think this White House they need to think about that very carefully.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
We just spoke about how the potential for nuclear conflict as increasingly aggressive China and what this all means for the United States. Let's now hear from Patrick Cronin, Asia Pacific Security Chair at the Hudson Institute, a prominent think tank based in America's capital. As a longtime expert of Korean and East Asia security, Cronin speaks about the possibility of armed conflict and what implications escalations in the Korean Peninsula has on other U.S. allies in the region. That includes Taiwan. Let's take a look.
Well, I don't think it will escalate into real conflict at this point, but it is an escalation. So let's talk about the context in which these missile launches, these air drills are happening. Essentially, the massive summit diplomacy of 2018 that followed the fire and fury year of 2017 when North Korea was finishing an ICBM capability. That diplomacy fell apart by the time he got to early 2019 at a Hanoi summit between Trump and Kim. We've been in a stalemate on talks between North Korea and the United States since then. And now that we have a conservative government in Seoul and the Yoon administration, we have a harder line position on inter-Korean relations. So everything is solidifying in terms of old hostilities between North and South and between U.S. and North Korea, while North Korea is trying to advance significantly its capabilities, its nuclear and its missile capabilities. North Korea announced a lot of these ambitions in January 2021 is when they announced them at the Korean Workers' Party conference. In 2022, they've been on a concerted missile campaign, and on 2 November in Seoul time, they launched more than 24 missiles, short-range missiles, both sides of Korea. And what's escalatory about this, a couple of things. At least one landed across the informal maritime border, the northern limit line. It's also an escalation in the sense that North Korea, long having said they wouldn't attack South Korea, is clearly launching these to intimidate and show that they can attack South Korea. Now, why is North Korea doing this? North Korea is doing this for 2 reasons. One, first, they want to make sure that they build up the most capable, diverse arsenal that will ensure regime survival and ultimately allow Kim Jong-un to have coercive power from this arsenal in his mind. The second is to essentially create a pretext for doing that in the form of putting leverage on Seoul and on the Yoon administration, but also on the United States and on others that opposes the resumption of missile drills. And these air drills that we see from the U.S. and South Korea are a significant upgrade in the kind of air power that, by the way, North Korea doesn't have. And it's an exercise that clearly intimidates North Korea. So North Korea is showing its objections through kinetic means, but it's really doing them as a pretext to advance their research and development on their missile program.
Will the situation likely draw in other allies of the U.S.? And will this distract the U.S. from containing China's aggression, especially towards Taiwan?
North Korea has already drawn together South Korea, Japan, and the United States in a way we haven't seen for at least 5 years. And I think this relationship now has ambitions to grow well beyond anything we've seen in the history of U.S., South Korea, and Japan relations in recent decades. So this is a good sign for the allies. At the moment, what Seoul and Tokyo are working on is resuming the kind of close rapport they had on information sharing and working on humanitarian assistance and search and rescue, working on anti-submarine warfare to a level that they had achieved before 2017, which is when there was a downturn in South Korea and Japan relations. And North Korea's hostilities, as well as, by the way, China's hostilities and Russia's hostilities, are all making South Korea and Japan realize that their common interests are so great that they need to work faster to improve their relationship. And this is moving at fairly quick speed among the governments.
You just heard from Patrick Cronin from the Hudson Institute on what heightened conflict in the Korean Peninsula could mean for the U.S. allies in the Indo-Pacific region. Let's now go into the specifics of this conflict. So now we talk about the conflict. We just want to know that North Korea is alleged to conduct the 7th nuclear test launch. So what does it mean for the United States? And the U.S. also issued a warning to North Korea saying that if you continue with the nuclear weapons test, that would be the end for the Kim regime. So is there any room for de-escalation? And could you see any other development between the tensions across the U.S. and North Korea? What's the relationship between the two?
I think definitely if that day really occurred, meaning that the Kim Jong-un triggered the nuclear bomb, and that definitely would be the end of his regime. I mean, goes without question. It's not only about North Korea, but also the same case for Russia. But we don't want to see that to happen, right? Because that's going to be a disaster. It's a destruction on the whole humankind. It's not only in the region of Asia. So this is really about the wisdom and also the tactic of the Biden administration. We can remember when, back in the Trump administration, Trump was that type of bluff person that knows how to maximize his intention, especially on appearance, that he's going to punish North Korea, to the extent that when Kim thinks maybe it's a better idea for us to come back to the negotiation table and talk, then that's really consistent with the calculation of Trump. So the problem with Biden is that he wants to be tough, but not all the way through. Democrats normally has the problem of believe in that kind of symbolic, liberal, or kind of warm, fuzzy feeling type of thinking, and even the just that kind of language. That's not working anymore. Now it's like in the 2022, and we knew that sometimes you really have to show the real muscle. And what I mean by that is that the drills, military drills, and even a lot of regional civilians that against North Korea. Kim knows that if we mean it and we can do it effectively if you dare to do something. But I think now saying that is too late. Okay, so I think now it's better for Biden to come back to the point to think about what North Korea really wants. Normally, Kim Jong-un, what he wants is about his, the domestic problem, starvation, and also he needs some kind of material benefits from the Western societies. He can do that from United States and European countries. He can do that as well from China and Russia. So he's kind of play the game with the both sides. So Biden really needs to know what he wants and try to talk to him regarding that. That's number one, I would like to say. Number two is that because North Korea knows that it is now an alliance where North Korea, China, and Russia, they are come together working as a team. But for the United States, in the perspective of Biden, he really should distract or separate out the two parts of the country. One is North Korea, the other parts, China and Russia. I know it's not easy, but the solution to that is that he can convince Kim that we can talk regarding what he wants, and try to distract Kim from his reliance on the China or even Russia.
Do you think it's possible for Biden to force Kim back to the negotiation table like his predecessor?
Maybe after the midterm election, when the peninsula, the tense situation kind of settle down a little bit, let Kim calm down a little bit. Maybe there's a chance to come back to the negotiation table. But still, the material benefits, what is that? I'm more realist about this.
Do you feel there's any room in terms of maneuver, like say the U.S. could, kind of put Kim into a box and as the unpopular word regime change. Do you feel that Biden would have the guts to do that?
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, there's a analysis talking about the South Korea, especially the current president, in Suk-yeol, Yoon Sang-yong. His strategy to deal with Kim is that he wants to assassinate him, to remove him from power. And Kim himself knows this. So he grant authority to figures in his team to push the button of a nuclear bomb as a counter-strike in the absence of his ruling. So that's kind of a strategy between South and North. So now that I think South Korea, like this time we see that there's a missiles launched from North into the waters of the South Korea, and also vice versa. So that I think that escalation would reach to a high point where they really think about the possibility. I think it's still possible out there.
Speaking of, Patrick mentioned to Charles earlier that, the missile drills from North Korea could be seen as retaliation, to the largest U.S. South Korea air drills that have happened, and because of that, I think it could be seen as insecurity coming out from North Korea. Do you feel that this message that is sent from the U.S. is provoking North Korea? And how should U.S. allies in the Pacific, including Taiwan, deal with this delicate situation going forward?
First of all, we can see the Kim Jong-un use the nuclear missiles is not abnormal. I mean, his parents and his grandpa use that even more. Even also use that. Their family has this
family
kind of
traditions.
And his grandpa and grandfather use it as a more like a bargaining chips, bargaining for foreign aid.
And you feel it's changed?
It changed. I would say his parents, his grandpa and grandfather use it as a bargaining chip for foreign aid and also assistance. However, Kim Jong-un is different. He uses it more as provocative and more used as kind of maintain his political survival, to maintain his positions. Especially he's facing more kind of external threats from South Korea. We call hawkish Yoon, President Yoon, and also Biden's kind of hub and spoke framework try to bring South Korea and Japan together using we call the democratic alliances to fight against authoritarian alliances. So I think Kim Jong-un, he feeling that. He knows he has potential threats coming from South Korea, current President Yoon. So I think this is why this time he uses more kind of very we call a hawkish way and provocative way and shot so many missiles. However, when we talk about alliances, one thing I want to mention is when you study conflicts, alliances formation is always a very critical and significant factors. Okay, because from the study we know 16th, 17th, and 20th centuries, if there's alliances, especially formed with major powers, there will be a war after the alliances form within 5 years. Okay, this is one very important thing for we to study. If United States and they right now try to use more like Quad or AUKUS and try to share the value with these democratic alliances, and probably there will be another alliance coming up, and there will be a new Cold War coming. We don't know yet, but there's a very significant result is alliances will bring country into a conflict.
So do you feel that real conflict is actually nearing?
Yeah, and this is a third thing I want to mention is right now we have to look at the South and North Korea issue. However, they are proxy war. This means the competition between China and the United States. Why? Because China, Beijing view Pyongyang, the North Korea, is a very important strategic partners. Actually, Pyongyang is Beijing's loyal for ally. Okay, so I mean, it's not my argument. It's Professor Victor Cha. He mentioned that Beijing never want to see a reunified Korea, especially reunified under the South Korea administration. Okay, Beijing never want to see that. So this is a very important thing if Beijing doesn't agree reunification of two Koreas. And Beijing really see the now is kind of we call hawkish fight back from democratic allies and try to challenge Beijing's the power. What's Beijing's position right now? What's China's position right now? Okay, and I think Washington need to handle this with Beijing too on the Korean Peninsula issues. However, we can see now Washington and Beijing, they have very competitive relationship, not only in the Korean Peninsula right now. Cross-strait relation also will be another focal point. So I can say East Asia will be a very interesting playground, a realist playground in the future.
Right.
Well, as you see, Taiwan is kind of like a proxy.
So I'm just curious, speaking of forging alliance, then what should Taiwan do? Who are our close partners? Definitely the US, right? But if we're going to forge alliance in this region with so much like things going on, rising tensions, what should we do so that we can get them together to jointly defend Taiwan or defend democracy in this region?
I think, first of all, Taiwan is Taiwan. We have, like what I said, we have high technology, and also we are good at producing good quality electronic chips. This is how we can build our networking with the countries in the world, sharing similar value with us. And second thing, because we have limited national capabilities, so we need to be wisely plan. How can we have we call capable and also efficient national defense strategy. And we need a lot of support because we know that we have limited budget every year in our national defense budgets. And now we need to put more money into that. Look at the Taiwan Policy Act. Okay, in the future, we probably will need a lot of money to build ourselves as a porcupine island. So we can use different way. How can we try to bring more countries sharing similar value with us and can provide us our national defense capability and help us do our research and design.
Exactly.
Also, our country also need to do research design by ourselves. Okay, I think this is also a very important thing we can think about in the future.
I think not just about Taiwan, but Patrick also mentioned that North Korea is actually bringing U.S. allies together, such as Japan and South Korea have actually not really talked because of historical issues, how both countries interpret history in a different way. But this conflict has actually brought these two democracies together. Do you feel that that will extend to Taiwan as well? Many have mentioned that Taiwan has never had a contingency plan with the defense ministries of East Asian democracies. Do you feel that with these different crises going on, will that bring attention to Taiwan?
I think Japan is also a very interesting case because they have the domestic constraint on their constitutions. They have the Constitution, Article 9, So they have limited budget on their national defense, especially on their development of their self-defense team.
Although it has gone up like by, I think, what, to 3% or something close to that.
They will probably gradually increase. However, like what I say, the Prime Minister Kishida, he is thinking about join, we call it the Biden's the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, okay, and also the Quad, and also probably the closer U.S.-Japan alliances, okay. However, Kishida firstly he need to handle the different voices, okay, from the domestic politics, whether they want to go back to what we call a normalized country, which means they have more freedom and flexibility to deploy their troops around the world. Okay, Kishida needs to fix this. Second thing, Kishida also needs to fix the economic issues in Japan right now. Okay, Japanese people pay a lot of focus on the economic issues. Things like they have already experienced several years, 20 or 30 years, we call the economic.
And their largest trading partner is China, of course.
Yes. Okay, so whether Japan can hedge between China and the United States will be a big task for Kishida administration.
Indeed.
But would Taiwan be kind of, as people say, sacrificed or used as a bargaining chip? And if that conversation does come where we see immediate conflict, or do you feel that, values surpass that of certain economic interests, as we've seen in Ukraine?
Yeah, this when we study democracy, we always say why democracy is so important, and why country with democratic systems they are more easy like to form alliances, because first they pay more attention to rule of law, they pay more attention to what we call the contract. They are more easy to fulfill the contract. This is why Biden wants to use this idea to bring all the democratic countries together, because they are obeyed by the law or agreements, okay, written by them.
The U.S.-led.
Yes.
As they call it, the security order.
Yeah. So this is one, when we talk about Taiwan and how Taiwan can cope or cooperate with U.S.-Japan alliance, I think it's one thing we need to think about very carefully, because right now U.S.-Japan not only strengthen their security cooperation, they are also secure and strengthen their economic cooperation. This summer they have a 2+2 meeting hosted in Washington, D.C. And they are thinking about how can Japan and United States, they can bring all the economic activities, making them cooperate, collaborative, all together. And they are thinking about, they call it a basket strategy. How can they try to apply the IPAF into
That
their
involves supply chains as well.
chain, the economic, the technological supply chains. So I think Taiwan is a good chance to join this team too.
Yeah.
So sorry, go sorry.
Sure. I would like to add up that when we talk about our democratic friends from different Western countries, right? Charlie's absolutely made a right point that it's about value. But to me, it's not only about value, because the value will be empty without solid benefits out there. The reason why I say that is that we know that the society, especially like United States, the capitalism, right? In a capitalist society where we see demand and supply, and consumers get to decide what kind of products he or she likes to buy, right? But in an authoritarian society like China, this is really nothing has to do with demand and supply. It's about assignment. Right, the government top-down determine what to keep, what not to keep, when to shut down the bank, when to take away all of your money in your bank account. Right, that's arbitrary type of top-down power. And we also knew that there's a deficiency to capitalism. All that like the wealth gap and also the uneven distribution among people. So that all that. But the thing is. In a democracy, the logic of democracy is more consistent with capitalism instead of authoritarian, because in a democracy, it's also bottom up. We as voters, we can get to choose whatever candidates we like, and the candidate has to show their best face in front of voters in order to attract votes, right, to win the next election. So it's not really about value. It's also about the plausibility of lifestyle. And democracy never is perfect. In the past several decades, we have seen a lot of threats to democracy, even including populism back in 2016, right? But still, it's not the best system, but it's plausible. It's at the least we can get to take care of the minority and listen to those people who are disadvantaged.
And change is guaranteed.
And then change that, right? There's a possibility out there as opposed to authoritarianism. Right.
A quick follow-up question. You just talked about semiconductor, which is the stronghold of Taiwan's development and industry. And that is also an important reason why the U.S. supports Taiwan so much. But what if now the U.S. is redeploying its manufacturing base, it's manufacturing the semiconductors or the chips locally? Then what if TSMC is not as valuable to the U.S.? What will happen to Taiwan?
Right. If we still remember a couple of years ago, TSMC had a plan to build up its factory in Arizona, and even the Foxconn led by Chairman Guo Taiming, right, was supposed to be in Wisconsin, right? So the U.S.-Taiwan bilateral cooperation in terms of producing microchip is still going on, I believe. But from the perspective of the United States, it does not. The United States government does not want to put all the eggs in the same basket, and that's understandable. But in that, we as a Taiwanese and also our Taiwanese government has to figure out that what kind of role we can play, and that's vital. That's crucial. Maybe that's not indispensable, but that's vital. That's crucial to the benefits of the U.S. government. So that's the way to think about that. I'd rather not to think about it in a naive way, in that we want to view ourselves as always irreplaceable. There's no such thing as irreplaceable in market. After all, somebody's gonna compete against you, might be catching up with you. So what you have to think about is innovation. So innovation is not only about slogan, but it's about your survival, the survival of the industry. Right.
Very well said.
As Charles mentioned, there's more opportunities with Taiwan going forward, with the U.S. leading friendshoring and all that, with Japan. And we'll talk a bit more about what Albert just mentioned in terms of China in our next part. Let's now hear from Bob Sutter, Professor of Practice of International Affairs at George Washington University. Bob spoke to me in Washington, D.C. about the largest threat to the U.S.-led regional order in East Asia. Let's take a look.
This is not a partisan issue. It's an issue of danger. It's an issue of threat. And they're trying to protect America in this situation. And so I think that's very important to keep in mind. This isn't a free ride. They don't see this as a free ride. This is very tough, very hard to do. And that's what they're doing. They're trying very hard to defend America in the Congress. And so that's sometimes not appreciated. It seems a little simplistic, but if you see the danger, you have a sense of urgency. What do you do? And that's what they're doing. And Taiwan is a big part of this. They're our partner in dealing with these economic threats that come from China and dealing with the security dangers that come from China. And so, so I think that's going to continue because the danger persists. Mr. Xi Jinping is going to be the leader of China for a long time, and he's a very determined guy. He sticks to what he believes in, and zero COVID policy is just one example of how he'll stick to it, even though it doesn't seem to be the right thing to do. And so, it's that's what we're up against. Mr. Biden, he is convinced of what we need to do is to counter these dangers coming from China. I think he's very clear about that. He says, he said we can't let them win. He said that several times, and so I think he believes it. And it's a big transformation for him. 2 years ago he wasn't saying that, but he does now all the time.
You just heard from Bob Sutter, longtime U.S. diplomat and professor of international affairs at George Washington University, who spoke to Rath about China under Xi Jinping, the largest threat to America and its allies in the region. Let's discuss how Taiwan and other Asian democracies can navigate through these challenges. So I would like to know that after what we heard from Bob, we know that there is bipartisan consensus in the U.S. government that the challenge of the century is dealing with with an increasingly authoritarian China under Xi Jinping. And we know that President Biden is determined to not let China win. So in this scenario, again, this backdrop, what is the role of Taiwan in the face of this kind of changing situation? And how can Taiwan forge closer cooperation with the United States to fight against China?
Okay, I would like still to touch upon a little bit on the domestic, election in the United States. We knew that the inflation problem in the United States is still very severe, right? And most of the ordinary Americans, they care about economy issue the best. And then second, when it comes to the abortion, right? Okay, but still, we see the performance either from Democrats or from Republicans. They talk about the importance of democracy. And even President Biden himself talks about the threat to democracy as his major theme. It doesn't matter whether that works or not, obviously not. But still, he focused on that and try to make appeal to the American public. So that means in that context, what we can do as a Taiwanese in the whole context is such that number one, we are democracy. Number two, we are the most immediate victim of this Chinese bully, right? As a neighboring country, for God's sake, we still have a straits out there, Taiwan Strait. But still, we are so close by, and our population size is much, much smaller. So we as a Taiwanese, I think that value-based, it's like what kind of to echo what Charles just mentioned. This is not just only about value. Democracy is not about value. I already explained that it's not only about value, it's also about your economy, your lifestyle. But now, what I'd like to say is about the third point, is that it's about the domestic politics in America. As long as we can address or make appeal to the voters in a domestic America, however difficult it is, we have to do that. And don't ever forget that we got a lot of Taiwanese Americans out there. And their parents, and they are rich, and they are hardworking. They can do as much as Israel's in the United States. The Jewish people out there, they lobby the Congress in the Capitol Hill. They try to convince their local district representatives to say something for Taiwan.
I think you mentioned a great point, because if you look at new Pew data, it shows that the U.S. public is actually in support of Taiwan and in support of the U.S. going strong against China,
right?
Which we haven't seen in decades.
Sure, but we don't want that. We don't want to see that only as a lip of service. We want that can to materialize. We want something solid out of that. So I think we should take one step further rather than just satisfy what we had before. Because like what I said, the warm fuzzy feeling is not enough. It's far away from enough. We need something solid. That's why I have been arguing for the stance that back in Trump administration, we have to try our best to make sure that the law friendly to Taiwan could be enacted in a domestic American system, because president comes and go, but law will stand there, such as Taiwan Relations Act for there since 1979.
And
so we have to work on that.
Policy Act,
yes,
Charles mentioned.
right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So apart from legislation, do you see anything else that can be done to convince the American public?
Mm-hmm. I think now the first priority, or on the negotiation table or on the cooperation table, if you will, between the United States and Taiwan, is that we talk about the arms sale. We have to think about what's the most tailor-made weapon type for Taiwan. And it used to be that our Defense Department prescribed a list of the weapons that we want to buy, and for the United States, and they even, they either okays it or not. But now we have to take one step further to talk to the United States. Even maybe it is going on already, which we don't know, but maybe it's with Japan, and even with South Korea, with the Philippines, all together, talk about, what's the most appropriate weapons for Taiwan to buy. And of course, what Charles mentioned, that the budget is limited on the part of Taiwan, and we also have to deal with other societal issues like low fertility rates, and also housing, the elderly societies, and they're all excluded. Other budgets, I understand that, but still, the survival of Taiwan should be the first priority, because it's not only about the survival of Taiwan's democracy, but also our lives. Exactly. So I think we have to take that seriously, and then think about things more wisely instead of ideological thinking. And we should always have to remind ourselves of avoid getting involved with the partisan fights in the United States, either Republican or Democrats. I think that's the smart thing for us to do, because we are not Americans. We don't have voting rights there, so we better stay neutral. But I think what Professor just mentioned in the footage is that it's a bipartisan support for Taiwan. So we don't need to worry about whether there's a change in government would lead to change in support for Taiwan. And things has proven that my statement is correct. Is when Biden stepped in a position of the Oval Office, still he's for us, right? So it's a one-way ticket. It never come back. So we don't need to worry about.
You feel that's not going to change in the
I don't think
future.
it's not going to change.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the elephant in the room. And Charles, what do you think, as Albert mentioned, with all these countries thinking about how to deal with threats, and many of them are U.S. allies, with Xi's third term, do you feel that the dynamics in Asia will change significantly, given that she's surrounded by American allies?
Okay. Look at this time Xi's speech in 20 National Congress. We can see he controls the power, very central power. For the next 5 years or 10 years, he will be the man who will decide China's domestic and also foreign policy. So the first thing I would say is we need to study his rhetorics, his words. For example, he also mentioned the great rejuvenation of Chinese nations, the unseen changes for the past 100 years.
He has a book, I think.
Yes. Okay. It's not just like he murmurs. It's all his ideas and his rhetorics. So we need to know what he wants and also what he will plan to do. Okay, very, very carefully.
So what does he want?
Actually, he wants we call a rejuvenation of the Chinese nations.
What does that mean exactly?
Strong and unified China. This is in his dream. However, if you look at United States, Washington, just a few days before the 20th National Congress, White House published the 2022 National Security Strategy. Okay, it's very interesting. I think this point out very one thing is that Washington just want to say, no matter what she want to say there, we already view China as a competitor. Okay, in the report, it clearly shows PRC China as the American most consequential geopolitical challenge. So I can say that U.S.-China relation for the next 5 years will still in a very, very serious competitive relationship. So if we focus and set up all the framework between the United States and China, now we look at East Asia, how the secondary in East Asia to handle this kind of situation. For my previous research, I always say we need to be very careful, cautious about these two giants. When two giants or two whales are fighting, what we need to do? We are small shrimp.
We're stuck in between.
Stuck between the shrimp. I always say there's a term we call hedge. Okay, hedge means you do your best, but you prepare for the worst. You don't want to put your eggs in the same basket. Okay. However, now we are very close to the United States for sure.